Welcome to Module 5, which is all about bias. So, task for you now, read the scenario in your workbook, see if you can work out what's happening and jot down any answers. Pause the video, and then when you're ready, restart it to move on to find out what's happening here. So, this is a scenario. A father and son are in a horrible car crash that kills the dad. The son is rushed to the hospital just as he's about to undergo an operation. The surgeon says, "I can't operate. That boy is my son. Explain." So the first answer that comes up is that actually the surgeon is a woman. So if you got that, well done you. And if you didn't, it just means that there's a bit of a gender bias going on for you there that you can now be aware of. There's also a second answer here, which if you've got people who are a bit more open, might have come up. So that is that perhaps the surgeon is still a male, but the male is in a same-sex relationship with the father and it's their child. And if you spotted both of those, well done. You've obviously got quite a lot of awareness. But if you didn't, don't worry. This is all about helping to spot your unconscious bias, help you notice it so that you can be more aware in the future. So there are different types of bias that we might experience, and that's something that's really helpful for us to know what biases we have, so that we can be more open about that in the future and be more aware and be able to spot that a bit more when we're out doing our roles. So the first one is affinity bias, and that's his preference for people who share similar qualities to ourselves. We are people who like to be in tribes, humans do, and so we are more likely to flock to people who share similar qualities to us. And if that's something you've noticed about yourself, just being aware of that when you're doing your role and what that means in terms of your biases, what might happen there. Attribution bias then is about making judgment about why someone behaves in a certain way. And again, this is really important when you're doing your role. If you have that attribution bias of just really stepping back and being curious about why someone might behave in a certain way. You might not really know or understand, but knowing that you're curious about it will help you reduce that attribution bias. Conformity bias then is agreeing with the views of the majority to fit in or conform with a group. So if you're doing some work with a group of people and you're the only one that disagrees with what they're saying, you might feel this urge to conform with the views of that majority to fit in or to conform within the group. Confirmation bias is giving greater weight to evidence that confirms our views and experiences. So it might be that when you're out and about, you give greater weight to something that makes sense to you, for example. And it's so important that you do just step back, be curious, and look at the facts before you make any decisions or judgments. The halo effect then is when you focus on something really positive on someone and you ignore everything else. So maybe they have a very positive attribute that you like or that you can connect with, but there's a lot of other things that perhaps aren't so great. So, for example, you recruit someone just because they've been to Oxford, or you prioritize someone because they were once a celebrity. Name bias is when someone is negatively discriminated against because of their name. So, for example, research in one project showed that white sounding names were regularly receiving more callbacks for interviews than an African American sounding name. And so, when you are interviewing people or meeting people in your role, just be really aware if any judgment comes up for you when you read someone's name. When you read a name, what is popping up? Are you getting a preconceived judgment or image of someone? Are you making judgments about someone based just on their name? And if you are, again, just being kind to yourself. We all have biases, but really noticing that that's happening, bringing it into conscious awareness, and then you can start to make changes to that. And finally, then the contrast effect. So when you compare someone against someone you already have a favourable view on, instead of assessing them on their own merits. So maybe you've got a favourite colleague or volunteer, and if that volunteer or colleague introduces someone to you, you're more likely to have a favourable view of them because the person that introduced you is someone you like. So again, just being aware of that and what that might mean in your role. So I'm going to play a video for you now, which really helps us think about unconscious bias, what it looks like, why we have it, and what we can do to minimize it or bring it more into conscious awareness, which will help us manage it going forward. And then we'll finish the module with a bit of a conclusion about the things that we can do to manage our unconscious bias.
Your brain, by some accounts, receives roughly 11 million pieces of information each second, but your conscious brain is only able to process about 40. How do you handle all the rest? You handle it because you're really using two brains. Your conscious brain, which works with facts and data, has very little capacity and processes information slowly, and your unconscious brain, which is habit and intuition driven, has huge capacity and is really fast. One of your unconscious brain's best tricks is its ability to recognize patterns and use them to assign people and things to categories, allowing your unconscious brain to deal with all of the known, not dangerous issues, and leave only the few unknown or dangerous issues to your conscious brain. This allows us to recognize a pattern and act on it, rather than having to think about every interaction as if we were experiencing it for the first time. We can glance at that four-legged animal and know if it's a wolf or a cocker spaniel. That recognition allows us to make assumptions about the animal facing us, that the wolf belongs to the wild animal category and is likely to be dangerous, or that the cocker spaniel is in the domestic dog category and not likely to be dangerous. The assumptions we make about these pattern groups are likely to be based on our own experiences, on information we have gained from our culture or background, or from the media we listen to or people we admire. Unfortunately, those assumptions are often wrong. When we categorize people, our brains apply two other tools. One is affinity bias, a hardwired preference to respond positively to people who look, sound, and act like ourselves. Brain imaging scans show that when people are shown images of faces that differ from their own, it activates in milliseconds activity in the part of the unconscious brain that alerts us to possible danger. This may reflect a survival tool left over from ancient times when danger often came from those outside our immediate group. Today, however, this means the associations and biases are likely to be unconsciously activated every time when we come across a member of a group, even if we consciously reject group stereotypes. In addition to affinity bias, our unconscious brain categorizes people into groups and then connects those groups to our learned ideas or constructs about what is good or bad. Now, we've decided whether someone is like us or not, and whether they're good or not, all within milliseconds of meeting them. So, what can you do to manage your unconscious biases? You've already started by just learning about unconscious bias. Now, identify your own biases and address one at a time by building inclusive habits. Remember, if you do not intentionally, deliberately, and proactively include, you will unintentionally exclude.
So that just gives us a bit more of an idea about what unconscious bias is, what happens when we have unconscious bias, and what we can do. So just finishing with thinking about how we reduce the risk of bias, it's about slowing down decision making. So when we make decisions about people, just really noticing what we're doing, why we're doing it. When you're making a report, for example, thinking about, is there anything in there where you perhaps have used bias? And before you make a decision, just slowing that down and really thinking it through. You can discuss your decisions with a range of people to ensure you consider different viewpoints. And it's important that you educate yourself on different cultures and religions and build an understanding of people with different life experiences. You can challenge others when you spot their biases, and you can also ask others to highlight to you when they might spot a bias coming from you. So that's the end of our module on bias. We're now going to finish the course with the module on intersectionality and microaggressions.